name is David Conover. I'm the Dean and Director of the Marine Sciences Research Center here at Stony Brook University. This afternoon's lecture is sponsored by the Provost's Office and the Marine Sciences Research Center. And this lecture is the first of a series of events that honor not only today's speaker, but also the alumni of MSRC, many of whom are in the audience. So I would like to offer a special welcome to the alumni who are joining us. And also to our new undergraduates, some of whom are also in the audience. The other events that are taking place are a banquet this evening, which is sold out. If you can't get into the banquet, however, tomorrow we're having a special Alumni Day Festival down at MSRC on South Campus, including talks by distinguished alumni and a barbecue, weather permitting or weather not permitting. It's a pleasure to introduce the Provost of this university, Robert McGrath.
Thanks, David. It's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Jerry Schubel back to Stony Brook University to be part of our Provost Lecture Series and this wonderful celebration of the 37th anniversary of the Marine Science Research Center. With the Marine Sciences Research Center's expansion to Southampton, with its many new programs under the leadership of David Conover, this is a time of blossoming for our center. It's thus particularly fitting that Dr. Schubel is with us today to celebrate an institution that he did so much to create. For many of us, Dr. Schubel needs no introduction, but I'd like to say a few words about his current activities, and whether you know them or not, I want to remind us of some of his many accomplishments when he was here at Stony Brook. Dr. Schubel is now President and Chief Executive Officer of the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. This is a position he's held since 2002. He also serves as the Director of the Aquarium's Marine Conservation Research Institute and its Aquatic Forum. Prior to this position, he was President and Chief Executive Officer of the New England Aquarium from 1994 to 2001. Dr. Schubel's years at Stony Brook spanned 2 decades, from 1974 to 1994. During this time, as we know, he served as Dean and Director of the Marine Sciences Research Center, and from 1986 through 1989, he was Provost, the 4th Chief Academic Officer of Stony Brook. I remember that he often took on other important university tasks. In the early 90s, he chaired what was called then the Undergraduate Project Committee, Steering Committee, and it pleases me very much to say that many of the committee's recommendations for how the Stony Brook undergraduate education program can be improved have happened and are happening as I speak. And many of these things came out of that project that Jerry led. Now, by the way, I also remember when I was making an honest living as a faculty member, that I recall attending Jerry's valedictory address as he was stepping down as Provost. He had a fantastic one-liner. Now, probably this was a one-liner that only Provost could really appreciate. But as he got up, he announced that he was stepping down because of illness and fatigue. The president was sick and tired of him. Do you remember that? He has written extensively for scientific journals, publishing over 200 articles, as well as many publications for general audiences. The many books he's written or edited include The Living Chesapeake, and with Homer Neal, who preceded Jerry as Provost here, the book Garbage and Trash, Can We Convert Mountains into Molehills? He has long been active in regional, national, and international environmental affairs, serving in such organizations as the Marine Board of the National Research Council, the U.S. National Committee of the Census of Marine Life, and the National Sea Grant Advisory Panel, of which he was chair. Throughout his career, a major focus has been on identifying and evaluating alternatives for solving major environmental problems of the coastal ocean. Dr. Schubel holds a BS degree from Alma College, which is in Alma, Michigan, a Master of Arts degree in teaching from Harvard, and a PhD in oceanography from Johns Hopkins. Among his many awards and honors, Dr. Schubel is Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus at Stony Brook, and he has received an honorary doctorate from the Massachusetts Maritime Academy in 1998. In 2004, he was selected as a National Associate of the National Academies of Science. Please join me now in welcoming Dr. Jerry Schubel, whose talk is entitled Long Island, New York, and Long Beach, California, Bicoastal Observations of Two of the World's Great Laboratories for Exploring Possible Futures. Jerry.
Thank you, Bob, and it's great to see so many old friends and colleagues here. It's going to be hard for me to get through this, but I will try. So my title there, Long Island, New York, and Long Beach, California, Bicoastal Observations on Two of the World's Great Natural Laboratories for Exploring Possible Futures and a Strategy for Creating a Better Future. Last fall, the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy issued its report. It was the first comprehensive look at the oceans since the Stratton Commission report came out in 1969. It was preceded by the Pew Oceans Commission report, but that was not a comprehensive look. It made no apologies for looking at the oceans in terms of living resources and conservation. But both of these reports painted a very bleak future, a picture of the existing conditions of our ocean and coastal resources. The U.S. Commission report argues that we need to double the research budget within 5 years, make a major investment in infrastructure, including an integrated ocean observing system, IUS, and take new regional approaches to research, governance, and management. The litany of problems in the world ocean is very long, and you all know these, and I'm not going to read these, I'm just going to remind you of some of them. So the diagnosis, I think, is clear. Our ocean and coastal resources are in trouble. They're not properly valued, and we have not made the kind of investment in understanding the ocean that we have made in understanding space. So what's the prescription? First of all, more money for more research? Yes. An ocean observing system that is part of the Earth observing system? Yes. A regional approach? Yes. But I think there's a more fundamental problem, and that is exploiting what we know. And that's my topic this afternoon. The norm, the inevitable, is that decisions are made on incomplete information. That's always going to be true. But the norm is also, and I think this is the inexcusable part, that we rarely take advantage of all of the information and the knowledge that we do know about these environments. Over my professional lifetime, I've seen this go from single disciplinary studies of coastal systems like those of Pritchard that led to much of our understanding of the physics of estuaries, to studies that combine physics with one other discipline, often geology or biology, chemistry, and those led to integrated studies of the physics, biology, chemistry, and geology of major coastal systems. We have captured much of that understanding in the increasingly sophisticated mathematical models that we've developed. Some fully coupled 3D hydrodynamic and water quality models, and even ecosystem models. And while these models are far from perfect, they represent huge advances in our ability to capture what we know and to use it to explore what-if scenarios. But our capacity to fully exploit the advances of understanding that have resulted from these studies and to exploit the new tools that have been developed continues to be ephemeral and I think very disappointing. Admiral Conrad Lautenbacher, whom many of you know, he's the administrator of NOAA. Conrad likes to quote James Wilbur Purdy, who was the poet laureate of the United States in 1987 and 1988. Purdy said, and I quote, "All that we do is touched with ocean, yet we remain on the shore of what we know." Since I'm 3,000 miles away from Long Beach, I can declare myself as the poet laureate of the city of Long Beach. And I would tell you that when it comes to applying what we know about the ocean and to its management and governance, we are not on the shore, we're somewhere back in the dunes. I am absolutely convinced that the lack of scientific understanding is not the limiting factor in our ability to conserve and, when necessary, to rehabilitate major coastal ecosystems, and for that matter, other parts of our environment. It is the lack of institutional mechanisms to exploit the data, information, knowledge, and wisdom we have to identify, explore, and evaluate alternative actions for long-term sustainability. And it is the lack of these institutional mechanisms to engage the appropriate cross-section of societal stakeholders needed to generate the political will to make and stick with difficult choices. I'm not discounting the importance of the need for continued research and much more research. We need it. If you look at how much the U.S. Commission report says that we spend on ocean research across all agencies, $630 million. And if you compare that with space, there's the comparison. And the $15 billion is the amount that we spend on space only from the NASA budget. But we do know a great deal more about the nation's major coastal and ocean ecosystems than we often use, and we need mechanisms to mine the data and information we have and apply it to specific sets of management questions. We also need a healthy, robust national science enterprise that will serve our nation well in the future. And this has to include a pipeline that has a watershed with a diverse population for whom the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, have enormous excitement and appeal. We need to capture them early and keep them in train, and that is a national problem, and it's one that our former colleague, the one who got sick and tired of me, is now working on. The importance of integration, synthesis, and application need to be recognized, and they need to be appropriately valued. The late Ernie Boyer's book, Scholarship Reconsidered, makes the case for redefining scholarship to be measured in terms of discovery, integration, application, and transmission. And I think it's a powerful case. So my first point, the evolution of our scientific understanding of coastal systems has outpaced the evolution of institutional mechanisms to capitalize on these advances in scientific understanding. And second, we must involve more social scientists in this endeavor, and not just economists. We need them in our searches for sustainable environmental solutions. This afternoon, I'm going to describe to you a conceptual model of an institutional mechanism that works. It started here at MSRC, and I've been continuing to work on it and trying to refine it ever since. It's a very deceptively simple model, but it is one that is extraordinarily difficult to execute. First, though, I want to take a look very quickly at Long Island and Long Beach and why they make such marvelous laboratories. They have more in common than the word long in their names. They are two of the world's great laboratories for developing strategies for humans to live in harmony with their environment. Both have treasure troves of problems, and problems become opportunities for creative people. They are powerful laboratories for sustainability. Pogo once remarked that some opportunities are so large, they are insurmountable. The environmental issues facing Long Island and Long Beach and our nation and our planet are large, but they are not insurmountable. Long Beach and Long Island are also very different in many respects, from geology to climate to culture. And this afternoon, I'm going to compare and contrast them just a little bit and what I've learned about making environmental science relevant to society. I'll spend a little more time on California than on Long Island rather, because I'm assuming you know a lot more about Long Island than you do Long Beach. My own journey started actually at Johns Hopkins University, where I was a graduate student and I worked with the late Don Pritchard. He was my mentor. He made great contributions to oceanography, to MSRC, and to this university, and he certainly had a huge effect on me and on my professional life, and I miss him a great deal. Long Island was and is one of the greatest natural laboratories in the world. We're a center that's dedicated to understanding coastal processes and coastal phenomena, to understanding how people affect those processes and phenomena, to exploring plausible alternative futures with the goal of developing strategies that increase the likelihood of achieving and sustaining a desirable future. It was on that basis that MSRC was founded, and it was made very clear to me early on from Lee Kompelman that it was to have a focus on Long Island. Victor Hugo once said, "There's nothing like a dream to create the future." And from the very early days at MSRC, we had a big dream, and we were very fortunate that the university endorsed that dream. MSRC's roots then and today are in fundamental research. Excellence in fundamental research was and is essential. But I remain convinced that it is what MSRC does with that new data, information, understanding, and knowledge that sets it apart. The acronym MSRC stands not only for the Marine Sciences Research Center, but for making scientific research count. And I remember in the early days when I used to use that, some of the faculty whose faces I see out there tonight used to gag. just a little. I won't identify them by name. And they say, why am I getting so much echo? I mean, MSR's niche was coastal, multidisciplinary, integration, synthesis, application, and transmission of knowledge and of the organizational culture that was developed at MSRC to the next generation of scholars, to managers, and to broad audiences. MSRC operates at the interfaces among the coastal science disciplines and between science and management and policy. And in society, as in nature, most of the important things happen along and across interfaces. Being located on Long Island made the MSRC dream plausible. Long Island has one of the richest diversities of coastal environments in any comparable sized area anywhere in the world. There we are down here. There's Long Island Sound, the Peconics, Great South Bay, the Hudson, and all of this, if you put it in the context of regional issues, this is a powerful, powerful laboratory. There's a wonderful shot that I like, looking from the ocean back up toward the Great Lakes. And again, you can see these wonderful laboratories that we have. Fire Island, and it's a remarkable collection of diverse coastal environments. Very much more diverse, for example, than Chesapeake Bay, which people refer to as the mother of estuaries. But all of her siblings are very much like her, and they hang on to her, the old woman. This is a far more powerful laboratory, and I think it will become even more powerful in the future. This was a shot that was taken right after 9/11, and the smoke that you see is coming from the World Trade Center. But it gives a good setting, I think, to show the remarkable laboratory that we have here, with the Hudson Estuary, the East River, Long Island Sound, New York Harbor, all of the Fire Island, the wetlands, and we have the sole source aquifer, the steep population gradient from New York City out to the east end, multiple and conflicting uses. This came from one of the few studies showing the extent of urbanization of Long Island between 1930 and 1990. We have at the west, the world's greatest city, and at the east, we still have New York State's most important agricultural county. So the natural setting was perfect, and being part of the nation's one major research university, and an outstanding one at that, and a university that shared the MSRC dream, made it all possible. This is almost the same photograph in the fall, and you can see the fall colors in New England. So together these conditions, the Long Island Laboratory and being housed in a leading research university, provided the perfect stage for the creation of a center like MSRC. Having the perfect stage doesn't guarantee that you're going to create a great play. It only gives you the opportunity. The opportunities have to be seized, and there needs to be resonance among the platform, the problems, the programs, and the people. And you need to constantly reinvent yourself. If you ever think you've got it right, you already are in decline. Part of the reason, I think, for MSRC's sustained success has been its courage to challenge conventional environmental wisdom, to ask politically incorrect questions that are often unpopular. So Long Island was and is a great platform on which to create a great public research university and a great MSRC, and I congratulate all of you on what you have accomplished, and I'm very happy to be back, and I'm very glad that I played a small part in the history of MSRC. And David, thank you for bringing me back. Now, let's leave Long Island, and let's go to Long Beach, California. And it has to be California, as long as we have our present governor. I live in a city about the size of Boston, 500,000. We're in Los Angeles County, and the county of Los Angeles has a population of 10 million people. If that county were to be a state, it would be larger than all but 8 or 9 states. This is actually a shot of the beach for which the city got its name. And there's another shot of that same Long Beach. This too, I think, is a wonderful coastal laboratory. It is a mixture of some of the most pristine coastal environments anywhere in the United States. This is the north coast of California. But it also has some of the most highly altered. This is Los Angeles. These are the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, and all of this gray is modified watershed of the Los Angeles and San Gabriel rivers. The most highly altered watersheds in the United States and one of the most in the world. We have 4 of the nation's 13 national marine sanctuaries and numerous marine protected areas. The rich diversity of environments and of uses provide us with a unique opportunity for research, for management, and for development and testing of approaches to conserve nature and to accommodate human uses. We have the Scripps Institution of Oceanography to the south. We have the University of Southern California Wrigley Institute, very near where I am. We have Stanford, Berkeley, UC Davis, UC Irvine, but there is nothing that matches the Marine Sciences Research Center in the state of California, and there needs to be. In California, we have eliminated 90 to 95% of our wetlands. This is an artist rendition near where I live that was about 100 years ago. There's the same place today. We completely transformed the character of watersheds of the Los Angeles and San Gabriel rivers. We put the Los Angeles River, this was about 1900, downtown Los Angeles, and up until a little 1910, 1920, Los Angeles got all of its drinking water from the LA River. Today, that's what it looks like. It is the most channelized river in the United States. Over 96% of it is confined to a concrete ditch. Is that a crime against nature and humanity? Well, before it was put in a ditch, it was not unusual to see headlines like this. This was Friday, March 1938. 70 were known dead, and this was not a one-time only affair. With the large population living so close to a river, and rivers that are much flashier than rivers are on the East Coast, almost every year there would be terrible floods, often resulting in losses. So you make choices. And we took San Francisco Bay, which is one of my favorite estuaries. If you look at the green, those are what happened to the wetlands between 1850 and 1900, and the red shows the urban extent. We totally transformed this estuary. We cut the fresh water about in half by diverting fresh water for agriculture in the Central Valley and for domestic city use farther south. We used it to create salt during the gold rush for the gold miners. We have more invasive species in San Francisco Bay than in any major coastal ecosystem anywhere in the United States. Or more than 95% of the biomass and 95% of the species are invasive species. And yet it remains one of the most beautiful, productive, valuable coastal systems in this country. One of the questions I like to ask about these invasive species is, how long do I have to be there before I become a naturalized citizen? Because we're not going to get rid of them. All right, we've interrupted flows of sand to our beaches. We've built dams along the beach. We have built groins and jetties that interrupt the flows of sand. We've bulkheaded the cliffs, which was the other major source of sand. And so as a state for which the beaches are the #1 driver of tourism, we now spend a small fortune every year nourishing these beaches. We wanted a port, a major port. We have right outside my back door the 2 largest ports in the United States, the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles, which together are the 4th largest port complex in the world. There was no harbor there. At the turn of the century, the previous century, San Diego and Los Angeles were vying as to who would have the global port in the state. San Diego had the port, but they didn't have any will. Los Angeles had no port, but they had the will, and they were determined they were going to get it, and they did. So it's quite a remarkable state I find myself in. And our aquarium plays very unusual aquariums. They're unusual for an aquarium, and they're unusual in Southern California. We operate across the interfaces of the public and science and environmental management. The one thing that always is present in our programs is the public. But like MSRC, we are an interfacial institution. The environmental qualities that make California attractive and make the California economy hum are its beautiful and diverse landscapes and climates, all within a restricted geographical area. But there are some large threats on the horizon. These are the ones that I identified recently for an economic summit in California, and I suspect many of these are also on the list of loomings that people need to be worried about here on Long Island. Population, global climate change, freshwater availability, deteriorating water quality of coastal waters, dams, diversions, development, destructions of freshwater and estuarine habitat, sand for our beaches, and an uninformed and unengaged public. Uninformed about environmental issues and unengaged in seeking solutions. Population. California has the largest population of any state in the country. We're about twice New York's. That's not something that I'm proud of. More than 12% of the total U.S. population lives in the state of California, and we're expected to grow by 13 million people over the next 25 years. In the nation, about half of the population lives in coastal counties. In California, it's 80%, and as everybody knows here on Long Island, 100% of the population lives in coastal counties. California is a state with a population that even today cannot be sustained by resources within the state. There is not enough water, for example. And our growing population in California seriously threatens habitat biodiversity, and quality of life. The rich diversity of our ocean, coastal, and terrestrial habitats creates this wonderful treasure trove of biodiversity, but much of this is at risk, and Southern California has been identified as a hotspot for biodiversity loss on the terrestrial side particularly. It's not just the fact that we've grown so much, it's how we've grown. This is the population growth of LA County, and you just look in this last part, how we've gone from up to 10 million, and now this was 2000, and in 2004 we were at 10 million. So a rapid, large growth, but the bigger issue is how we've grown. If you look down at the lowest bar here, this is the growth of population in the inner city. Hardly any growth at all. The next one up is in the balance of the city, not much growth there either. The bulk of the growth has come in the suburbs. So California desperately needs to have smart growth, increased density, and infill housing so that the density within the cities in California could begin to approach what we have in New York City and in other major cities. Global climate change, predictions are for decreased snowpack in California, and that's our major water storage mechanism. What we store in snowpack every year exceeds the capacity of all of the reservoirs combined. We're also going to be faced with a significant sea level rise, as are you, as much as 1 meter by the end of this century. And when you think of the challenges that that's going to cause for Long Island in terms of shore erosion, flooding, saltwater intrusion into aquifers, and also in freshwater intakes on the Hudson, it's something that we all have to worry about. And also more very hot days in the summer, more days of 100 or more. California is wrestling with this, and I'm impressed by some of the things we're doing. We also have a governor who drives a Hummer, but he's a leading advocate of the hydrogen economy. California, this is what the state looks like in terms of water supply, surplus, and deficiency. There's San Francisco Bay. So you can see we have water surplus in the northern part of the state, and from San Francisco Bay all the way to the Mexican border, there's a water deficiency. The way we've solved this is to build a very extensive network of viaducts to bring water from San Francisco Bay from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta down, and when that wasn't enough for us, we built one to bring it in from the Colorado. And about 80 to 90% of all of the water we use in California goes to agriculture. And if you look ahead, we clearly have to conserve more, although California has one of the best water conservation records of any state in the nation. We're going to have to reclaim and reuse more. We're going to have to desalinate brackish waters, and there still will be a gap, and we're going to have to look to the ocean for ocean desalination. And that's something that is not very popular with many environmentalists. They worry about the problems of entrainment loss when you take the salt water out of the ocean, and they worry about the discharge. But you can mitigate against these. The one thing you cannot mitigate against is withdrawals of fresh water, diversions of fresh water away from estuaries. And we have seen significant losses. That's the delta at the head of San Francisco Bay, Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Mostly agriculture right now, although there are plans right now to build housing for more than 100,000 people over the next decade or so. This is also virtually all below sea level. There's a dike that surrounds it, and one of the big what-if scenarios in the state of California is if we have a major earthquake, what will happen to Southern California's water supply? It could disrupt the water supply to about 15 million people. And this is looking at the Sea of Cortez, which is the estuary of the Colorado River. You're looking at it from California. This laser doesn't show up very well, but anyway, here's the Baja Peninsula, and this is the Delta region here. And when John Steinbeck visited that area, he wrote about it with forests and jaguars. And now it is not unusual to have the only water reaching that delta in the summertime wastewater. We have really had a terrible impact on that. That's a picture of the delta. And I was with one of MSRC student, Jose Zertuch, was at our aquarium this past weekend. He was, until a couple of months ago, the director of the laboratory in Ensenada, and he told me to be sure to tell everyone here hello. Long Island is rich in estuaries, but in California we have very few major estuaries. Now we choose to call things like the Tijuana River, we made it into a national estuary, which makes about as much sense as Old Woman's Gut in Ohio being a national estuary, but that's a political story. We'll leave that one alone. Another problem we have, deteriorating coastal water quality. Tourism, fishing, surfing, all of these depend upon aesthetically attractive, accessible beaches, lots of sand, and having good, clean water. There are some of our beaches. Beaches in California are far and away the most important driver of tourism, both from people within the state and throughout the nation, and international tourism. Some of the most beautiful beaches I've ever seen anywhere. We also have some of those here on Long Island, so that's another similarity. And uninformed and uninvolved citizenry, well, California is an ocean-dependent state, but I think it probably ranks near the bottom in terms of ocean literacy among all coastal states. An ocean literate citizen is one who understands how the ocean affects him, how she affects the ocean, and who acts upon that knowledge. And we all need to be worrying about that, and I think that's also an issue here on Long Island. All right, let's talk about an approach for dealing with some of these loomings. These are the elements that I think we have to have. We have to have proper valuation of the resources at risk. We need to take a regional approach to finding solutions. It needs to be inclusive and transparent. We need to also make sure that we take a futuristic approach. And key to everything is having an informed, involved, concerned public and appropriate institutional mechanisms. On the proper evaluation, we've done a terrible job of valuing our marine resources. Agriculture spends well over $100 million a year just making the case as to how valuable agriculture is to this nation. We don't spend 10% of that on our ocean and coastal resources. A regional approach, I think it has to be regional to be successful, and I think it also has to be human-centric. We need to define regions that are scalable and so that the boundaries of the region match the issues and the problems we're trying to deal with. None of the regions that have been proposed, whether they're the long-term environmental regions, whether they're NOAA's regions, none of them really match the kinds of regions. They don't match the scale of the problems and the issues. And we need to do that. Inclusiveness and transparency. I think our strategies not only have to accommodate input from stakeholders, we have to be much more welcoming and encourage input from stakeholders of all kinds. Regional structures have to be flexible enough also to allow input from experts on any particular issue. And they need to be futuristic in their orientation. Wayne Gretzky, the great one, attributed much of his success in hockey and in life to his guiding philosophy. He said, "I skate not to where the puck is, but to where the puck will be." The problem in the environmental field is that we often skate to where the puck was, and then we're surprised that it isn't there when we get there. We have this unnatural, unhealthy, unrealistic preoccupation with restoring things to the way they were 100 or 200 years ago, and nature has changed over that period of time. So we would be well to design future landscapes and seascapes to accommodate the qualities that nature needs and that people want, and that are coherent with natural processes and that are sustainable. We need to be able to explore alternative pathways to the future using traditional scenarios and the most sophisticated long-term policy analysis tools that exist. These tools have been used in everything from figuring out how to wage war to health. They've never been applied on environmental problems on a regional scale anywhere. And we need to ride those trajectories into the future with the public. Go to a balcony in 2025 or 2050 and look back and ask, is this really where we want to end up? And if it isn't, we have the capacity to look back and ask about the decisions we're making in 2005 and say, what decisions could we make that would put us onto a different trajectory? Those are called disruptive strategies. And all of this, of course, presumes that you have a good idea of where you want to end up. We need an informed and involved public. And often, many of us, and I know I've been guilty of this, think the public is ill-equipped to deal with these very complex issues. But Thomas Jefferson had it right when he said, quote, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of society, but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education." All right, now I want to talk to you about a proposed institutional mechanism. For a long time now, I've been thinking about institutional mechanisms that can work in exploiting our advances in scientific understanding in the decision-making process. And I've been trying a lot of these out over many years in different parts of the country. It's kind of the knowledge value chain, and as I mentioned, I think we need to have one for each region that's scalable. And this is what it looks like. It starts with data, information, knowledge, wisdom, action. The value to decision makers increases on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, for those who can see it, it becomes more objective to your left, more subjective to the right. If the noise increases to the left, signal to the right, and so on. And the difference between data and information is Peter Drucker, the management guru, said that information is data endowed with relevance and purpose. Peter Medawar, the late Nobel laureate, said information is data that has been architected to answer a question or to deliver a message. The only people I know who want data are scientists. The last thing a manager wants is data. A manager wants information, and in fact, he wants something even more. He wants knowledge, which is information in context, or wisdom, the application of knowledge to specific circumstances, because decision makers have to make decisions. We chose this kind of a shape of a curve to remind you of Sisyphus. Remember, the gods condemned Sisyphus to ceaselessly roll a rock to the top of a mountain, and the stone would fall back of its own weight, and he had to push it all the way back up. And the thought was that there is no more dreadful punishment than futile and hopeless labor. And much of what we have done, those of us who, for example, have been involved in dredging projects for the last 20 or 30 years, every time we have a new maintenance dredging project, it is as if we had never done it before, even though we may have done it 25 or 30 times. And you start back down here, and we never get very far up this chain because we always are compelled to start over. Getting into that box and staying there, that's what you have. You have to get the right people into this box and keep them there long enough to have rich discussions, to explore everything you know, to integrate vertically and horizontally across disciplines, and bring it all to bear on what the particular decision the manager has to make. This is not a good box for most academics. It's mean-spirited, it's political in the extreme, and the academic rewards are small or non-existent for spending a whole lot of time in that box, and they can even be negative. So somehow, though, we have to be able to mine the data and information, integrate and synthesize vertically and horizontally, and take advantage of the best minds that we have, such as those that are in this room. And I think it's the kind of a catch and release program. You catch the best scientists, you drag them into that box, you extract from them everything they know, and then you release them so that they don't have this issue hanging over them, and you're able to bring them back in the next time that you need them. Now, what are some of the qualities that, all right, this is the one, we created one of these in Southern California, and we're doing experiments with it, and I'll explain the experiment we did in San Francisco Bay with this. But what are some of the qualities? This started at MSRC, so that was a little more than 10 years ago, and it's been refined a little bit, but not a whole lot. To make it work, you have to have a constant core of participants. You need this catch and release program. You need to have really good expert facilitation, expert staffing. You need a convenient location. This idea that somehow you're going to go off to some remote place and get in touch with your feelings and with nature doesn't work with busy people. It's much better to have it in a convenient location. You have to have a dedicated, attractive, functional, reconfigurable space. You have to have what's called a safe environment. Ronald Heifetz, who wrote Leadership Without Easy Answers, psychiatrist, is someone that I've worked with. And safe environment means it's an environment in which you can do adaptive work. You can go from where you are and get closer to where you want to be, and it has to be safe. You need a rapid and effective reporting of results. So it's not like doing an NRC study, which many of the people in this room have done, and so have I, that a year later or 2 years later, after it goes through all of the reviews, it might come out. This needs to be rapid and effective, and you have to have ready access to the most powerful tools. You have to have the computer models, for example. I do a lot of work in San Francisco Bay. Every time we do a study, we have to create a new hydrodynamic model, even though the one that you create is only incrementally better than the last one. So you've got to be able to keep these, maintain them, have them ready to exercise. And you need to have these other long-term policy analysis tools, such as the ones developed by the Rand Corporation. All right, there's San Francisco Bay. You can see down here, these green, those are salt ponds. Those salt ponds have been there since 1850, plus or minus a few years. The state recently acquired these for $100 million. And the goal was to rehabilitate them, or to restore them to what they were like 150 years ago. And I'm on the National Science Panel for this project. And increasingly I'm frustrated about the time and the energy we spend on trying to restore something that would have been very different today than what it was back then, even if we hadn't had salt ponds. We finally convinced a group that we would go away for 2 days, and we had a 2-day charrette. And we had the best scientists in that region throughout the state, and some from across the nation. And the goal was, nobody could mention the word restoration. And we had 3 outputs that we were going to produce. We were going to produce a map that depicted the desired landscape for this region that this group felt would be achievable and sustainable in 2050, and that would capture as many of the uses as possible that were included in the bill that led to the acquisition of these, that we would identify the most important and uncertain questions where research should be done, and that we would identify several specific locations for efforts to demonstrate success that the public would recognize. And we went into this, there was a lot of anxiety and anger about doing this. But the structure we used, we broke the group into 3 different teams. Each team had all of the different areas of expertise needed to accomplish the task. And each team had the same assignment, and they weren't allowed to talk to each other. So there was a competition. And as everybody here knows, when you have a competition among scientists, they're not about to say we can't do this. After 2 days, when we got back together, we didn't end up with one map, but we ended up with about 1 1/4 maps. And the only difference was disagreement on the problem that mercury methylation might play. And the other disagreement was in whether managed ponds had greater ecological value than natural wetlands. But other than that, they all converged on the same map of what the landscape could look like and should look like in 2050, and that would be sustainable. And we're continuing to pursue this. All right, now I want to close with just a few words of the, that's the one that we did for the San Francisco Alternative Futures. Now I want to close with just a few words about aquariums and how, since I've given you a prescription, how a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. This is our aquarium at dusk. I've been in this crazy field now, what's called free choice learning, since 1994. The nation's educational enterprise has 3 basic components. There's formal education, education in the workplace, and what now is increasingly called free choice education and learning. And the last is when people decide what to learn, where to learn, when to learn, with whom to learn, and on what terms. The challenges and the opportunities are totally different in the free choice learning sector than they are in the other two. In good formal learning, education is structured and it's sequenced, and it is driven to a large measure by extrinsic rewards. In free choice learning, all of the rewards are intrinsic, and it has to be very flexible. If formal education is more like a ladder or scaffolding, then informal free choice learning is more like a jungle gym. People get on when they want, they leave when they want, and if this were a lecture at the aquarium, I would probably have about 10 of you left. They're not anywhere near as well behaved. I am convinced that this is the Great Hall in our aquarium, there it is again. I am convinced that aquariums can do very serious things as long as we don't take ourselves too seriously. We're neutral turf and we're non-threatening. So it is not uncommon for us to get a call from the Secretary of Resources for the state to put together a panel or a study. Now this irritates the heck out of some of my academic neighbors to the north and the south, but when Governor Schwarzenegger wanted a response to the U.S. Ocean Commission report, it was our aquarium we were asked to put together a panel on research and education that included the Director of Scripps, the Director of Embari, and the Director of Sea Grant, and at least one other. So in summary, we have a growing set of environmental problems at all scales, in space and in time. We're not going to solve these problems without greater knowledge that will come only through research. We won't solve them without more powerful technologies, but these alone are not enough. We've got to have new approaches. We need new institutional mechanisms for harvesting and applying what we know, and we need to be able to do it on an ongoing basis. We need new ways of framing and addressing environmental problems, particularly those at regional and larger scales. The prescription I recommend is the creation of regional alternative futures forums using this basic model that had its start right here at Stony Brook. I would warn you that this year alone, it is estimated that there will be 20,000 incorrect prescriptions that will be written, so you probably shouldn't take mine too seriously. These forums, though, I'm convinced, can provide homes for clarifying and codifying the futures that are desired by society, and for exploring alternative futures using traditional scenarios. And they provide the homes for keeping these powerful tools up and running. And the way they work best, I think, is if they meet at least on a quarterly basis, and they tell the evolving story, and they tell it in rich, meaningful terms that the public are interested in. So you might think of creating the Long Island Regional Environmental Forum. I think it would be something great for this university. And I said we created one in one. Now, thank you all for inviting me back. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's great to see so many old friends.
What can we do to really to attract the attention, not only for research, but these important management issues to the oceans and get legislators to be more responsive?
Well, that's a big issue, and the President's U.S. Ocean Action Plan, which was the response to it, was very disappointing. And one of the big challenges that we have is we don't have any strong leadership, ocean leadership in the Congress anymore. Most of what we had, they either have retired or they're not going to run for re-election. And the people who have a passion for it aren't in the right positions. So it's going to be a struggle. Right now, the greatest political strength comes from Mississippi and Alabama, and this was before Katrina, but this will encourage them to do something in the ocean. And so we had Benny Thompson, who is the congressman from Mississippi. We had him at our aquarium about a month ago, 6 weeks ago. We've got to work with Congress because I think ultimately there are still a number of bills that could be passed. There are what they're called LOBs, big ocean bills, and there are LOBs, little ocean bills. There still, I think, is a chance for some movement. And the argument has been that when this came out, it was the worst of all times. We were in a recession, that we were mired in Iraq. But when the Stratton Commission report came out in 1969, we were in Vietnam, we were in a recession, and yet we got out of that very important thing. So I think we have to be patient, keep faith, and keep pushing on the people who can make a difference.
Well, we've had two major disasters in the coastal zone, horrific disasters between the tsunami and now Katrina.
And those, in a curious way, they will help us. And certainly with the tsunami from last December 26th, that has encouraged the Congress to move forward on the integrated ocean observing system, and I think that's going to happen.
One or two more questions, then there's going to be coffee and cookies, and we talk more.
I've been a member of the Long Island Regional Planning Board for a number of years, and I've seen a lot of really great plans being designed. And I haven't heard a word here today about corporate America. I feel like if corporate America, or the people who really control the very valuable property along the oceans, don't see a very immediate reason why they should get involved in this, then it's not going to happen. I was reading an article about how the GOP sees there are lots of opportunities with this latest disaster, among them reduced regulations so that they can go on and build more refineries and not have to worry about the sensitivity of these issues. And I just wonder if you have any ideas about making this a compelling issue for corporate America.
Well, when I said you have to include all stakeholders, I certainly include corporate America as important stakeholders. And not only do they control a lot of wealth and power, they also know how to get things done. It's interesting, you read the Wall Street Journal after the Katrina, and comparing and contrasting how corporate America moved versus the government at all levels. Walmart had things moved, generators and things moved 3 or 4 days in advance. I include them in it, and so we have to figure out ways to embrace them. And I think it can't be that it's big bad corporate America, but they're part of finding the solutions to this.
Let's thank Jerry again for